the 89th sequel, in which the church officially launches an official gazette, just like the government had its own gazette. So the Uganda Diocese also began an official gazette. That was in 1911, but then in 1912, when Bishop Tucker arrived, he begins work immediately. He was a workaholic. And so we are going to see how Bishop Tucker began his term of office as bishop, a very, very busy man. Welcome. We are celebrating the Church of Uganda at 150 years, celebrating its history as well as the history of the state. And I'm the author, Christopher Amos Chikomeko Ntambi. The Native Anglican Church began publishing every 3 months 2 separate gazettes, an English and a Luganda Gazette. They were marked the Diocesan Gazette Uganda, and they were for private circulation, published under authority. The new Gazette recorded, for example, Priora Sunday lessons, Church Missionary Society news across the region and also from Europe, the annual diocesan reports, diocesan income and expenditure statements, church news, as well as clergy reshuffles. The church gazettes were, of course, different from the British Protectorate government gazettes called Official Gazette of Uganda Protectorate, and those, remember, commenced earlier in 1908. The reason this must be celebrated is the sudden deterioration of what is called communication in the Native Anglican Church, especially after it gained independence. Such newsletters completely diminished, and as I speak to you today, there is absolutely nothing in terms of what you could call church news, provincial reports, income and expenditure statements, church news, clergy reshuffles, nothing of the sort. Instead, there is a lot in the mainstream media, which is always non-factual, which is always sometimes denied by the church. So we need to celebrate history, and we see how our forefathers so organized well that with such an authoritative publication, there will be no room for hearsay. There will be no room for non-factual reporting on church issue. So we indeed celebrate the church, the Native Anglican Church, for this stride in progress, which unfortunately died as soon as the province was declared and we became independent of the missionaries. So much for the publications. Now let's see the working, busy bishop. In his first ever confirmation, which was at Namirembe Makeshift Church, it was on the 29th of March, 1912. Whereas this was reported in Agafa, Buganda newspaper, no details were ever given. And this is what I mean, that whether this newspaper was factual or not, I wouldn't know, because I could hardly cross-check with the authoritative. Actually, Agafa Buganda was a missionary newspaper also, but that's what it is. They don't give details. Then the following day, which was the 30th of March, 1912, a much more described event took place. The bishop consecrated the Mengo Palace Chapel. It was a beautiful chapel whose roof was lined with reedwork, for which the Baganda of the time were famous for. Katikiro Apollo Kagwa read the letter asking his Lord Bishop to set aside the chapel for the worship and prayer to God. The Kabaka of Buganda, Daudi Chwa II, handed over the keys to the bishop, to Bishop Willis, who knocked 3 times with his staff, and the door was opened from inside by the chief of chiefs of the palace, Omusalo Tefiro Kungu Kisosonkole. The choir of Mengo High School proceeded into the chapel, while 1 Kings chapter 8 from verse 62 to 64 was the bishop's prayer of consecration. The preacher was the Reverend Henry Duta Kitakule, and he used 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 16, which says, God's temple in you, as his sermon. The service ended with a Holy Communion, and outside, since this was the palace, there was a tea party. Now, here is another question again as we celebrate a chapel inside the palace. The Buganda Palace was reinstated in 1993, and this was legally done. So the kingdom has been re-established. We have several palaces today. There is the Bamunanika Palace. There is the Nkoni Palace in Masaka. There is the Mengo Palace. There is the Chireka Palace. And there is the Banda Palace. Let me hope I haven't forgotten any. All those palaces belong to the current monarch. Of course, some belong to his father, as the tradition which says that he cannot enjoy the palaces of his parents, he has to build his own. What is known is that his particularly built own palaces are that one of Banda, where he actually resides and works from, and also the palace at Chireka. Those could be the only 2 palaces which are attributed to the current Kabaka. All the others are palaces that used to belong to his own father or even grandfather, if not great-grandfather. And so, the reason I'm mentioning this is that in all those palaces today, is there one with a chapel? So that we know there is a chapel there, and also we know there is a chaplain. I have no idea, and I have no authority to speak on whether that exists. And therefore, because of that uncertainty, that's why I must celebrate this one, which is certain, which is published. Mengo Palace Chapel, being opened on the 30th of March, 1912. It's public news. So why not celebrate that? Again, we are going back to the same story, that if such a thing exists today, it's in secret. We don't know. Yet Kabaka's palace should be something which is celebrated in the public domain. Okay, let's move on to the work of the new bishop. His first ever ordination service was not conducted at Namirembe Makeshift Church. It was instead held at St. Philip's, Mukono. That is where Bishop Willis did his first ordination, or presided over his first ordination. And it was on the 12th of May, 1912. The following became full priests: the Reverend W. Stewart, the Reverend R. Russell, the Reverend Henry Ruganda, and the Reverend Tefiro Bamutenda. The bishop also confirmed 108 candidates. However, that is all Agafa mu Buganda newspaper could write. There wasn't much more. Then the bishop made his first pastoral visits. He also began them in the month of May 1912. He began at Jinja, then went on to Uganda, then went on to Kamuli, then went on to Ngora, then went on to Mbale, and finalized the visit at Nabumali. So it was not until the 30th of May 1912 that the bishop returned to Namirembe. And all that is recorded in the newspaper Agafa mu Buganda. Again, there were no more details other than that. And then an interesting event. In the same month of May 1912, a Scottish veteran missionary called Mrs. Watson from the Kikuyu Scottish Mission in Kenya visited Mengo, and he brought with her Kasajja Stokes, the son of the hanged Charles Stokes. Remember, he was hanged in the Congo in 1895 for dealing in guns in a summary trial, which later the belligerents apologized and even compensated Great Britain. And I was always of the view that they compensated the governments instead of compensating the family. Anyway, it was time that Charles Stokes was brought back home. Indeed, the half-caste boy was returned home where his roots were. Remember, Mwanga and the royal family were responsible for this family because they are the ones who had got a woman for Stokes, and the wife was kept within the royal palaces. So the palace was responsible for this particular family. And as I speak to you today, the Stokes half-caste family is a very well-established family in Uganda. Lastly, Dr. Albert Cook established a treatment center for venereal disease. And this was in 1913. That center is what later on became the celebrated Mulago Hospital. So one would say that once again, Dr. Albert Cook with others, for example, with the Protectorate government, are responsible for the beginning of Mulago Hospital, but it simply began as a venereal disease center in 1913. He was assisted by his wife, who was a nurse and matron of Mengo Hospital, Madame Kate Cook. That is our sequel 89. May the good Lord bless us all.